Today I will tell you about the night my world changed, the night I learned a truth about my son that I was never supposed to know. As I prepared to join my son's dinner party, a slip of paper from my lawyer fell from my jacket. On it, in sharp, hurried handwriting, were the words, "Call me before you sign." I froze, the paper trembling between my fingers. My mind whispered, what could this possibly mean? I dialed her number, and what she revealed about my son shattered me. I could only stand still. Before I continue, please send back a like and subscribe so you will not miss more grandma life stories. Stories about dignity, justice, and the strength to keep standing when life tries to silence us. Your voices matter. My name is Quinn Harding. I am 67 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a brick house in Charleston, South Carolina. For 10 years I have attended the same rose garden every morning, and every night I write in a leather journal, a way of speaking to myself when the house is too quiet. These rituals are not habits, they are anchors. They keep me steady when everything else shifts. The most precious anchor of all is a silver pocket watch my husband Thomas left me before he died. Inside it he had engraved the words, "For every time you doubt, remember your strength. When my thumb rests against its cool surface, I feel him with me." That night, as the slip of paper fell, I pressed the watch into my palm as if it could steady my heartbeat. I lifted the phone and called Marian Cole, the lawyer who had worked with our family for decades. She answered immediately, her voice tight, stripped of pleasantries. "Quinn, listen to me carefully. Tonight, Ethan will ask you to sign a set of documents. He will tell you they are for your health care and convenience. In reality, they are powers of attorney and trust transfers. If you sign, you will lose legal control of your home, your finances, and your company shares, everything." I sat down slowly in the wooden chair Thomas once used to read the newspaper every morning. The silence of the room pressed against my ears. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. Each sound felt like a warning. I whispered, "You must be mistaken. Ethan would never do this." Marian's voice was firm. "I would never call you this way if I was not certain. The documents were filed for drafting under his name last week. The timing of this dinner is no accident. Quinn, if you sign anything tonight, you will be erased from your own life." The words hit me with the weight of a storm. My son, the child I had carried and raised, planning to strip me of everything under the mask of protection. For a moment, I could not breathe. The paper crinkled in my shaking hand. I looked at the rose-patterned wallpaper Thomas had chosen years ago, the familiar scent of polished wood filling the air. It was all so ordinary, yet the ground beneath me was no longer stable. My mind tried to fight the thought. Ethan was my only son. Surely he cared for me. Surely Marian was wrong. But her tone left no room for hope. "Marian," I said softly, "why would he do this to me?" "Because he believes he can," she replied. "Because he has convinced himself it is for the best, and because he is counting on you to trust him blindly." I pressed the pocket watch tighter until the edges dug into my skin. I remembered Thomas's words, "You must stand when the world tells you to fall." And yet, the ache inside me was unbearable. To imagine that the dinner invitation I had cherished as a sign of closeness was nothing more than a trap. That was a betrayal deeper than any wound. I closed my eyes and heard the rain beginning to fall against the window panes. The smell of damp earth drifted in. My roses would be soaking in that moment, bending under the weight of water, but refusing to break. I told myself I had to be like them. "Thank you, Marian," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "I will not sign. Whatever comes next, I will not let him take me by surprise." When I ended the call, the house returned to silence. Only the tick of the pocket watch remained, matching the beating of my heart. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The face staring back was older, lined, but the eyes were clear. Tonight would not be the simple family gathering I had imagined. Tonight would mark the beginning of a battle for my dignity, my independence, and the legacy Thomas and I built together. I folded the slip of paper carefully and placed it inside my journal, next to the pages filled with memories of Thomas. Then I put on my coat again, the weight of the watch in my pocket reminding me that even when love betrays, strength remains. When I stepped into their glowing house, everything looked perfect, too perfect. Ethan's smile was wide, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Vanessa floated to my side, her voice warm, yet her gaze lingered on me like a question already answered. At the table, I caught the flicker between them, a glance too quick, too practiced, and my stomach tightened. Something was waiting for me, hidden beneath their polished charm. My hand closed around Thomas's watch, its weight steady against my palm. I told myself to stay alert, to say little, to let the evening end without giving them the chance they wanted. When I finally stepped back into the cool night and closed my car door, I breathed in relief. I was safe for now. Their plan had not touched me yet. I lowered myself into the old wooden chair that still carried the weight of Thomas's presence. It had been his morning throne. Every sunrise he would sit there, coffee in hand, scanning the newspaper while the scent of buttered toast drifted from the kitchen. The chair creaked as I sat, reminding me that years had passed, yet some things never left. In my palm lay the silver pocket watch he had pressed into my hand before he died. Its surface was cool, almost icy, and the engraving inside glinted faintly in the lamplight. "For every time you doubt, remember your strength," he had etched. But it was not only the words I remembered, it was his voice, low and steady, saying, "Never sign anything if your heart feels uneasy. Paper can be heavier than stone when it steals your freedom." I closed my eyes and felt the truth of those words sink deeper. Tonight, the slip of paper from Marion had turned that advice into prophecy. The house was silent, but silence never frightened me. It was an old friend. After Thomas's passing, silence became my constant companion. What frightened me was the thought that Ethan, my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, was weaving plans that mirrored traps I had seen destroy other families. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the roses in my garden bent under the weight of rain. I could almost hear Thomas teasing me. "You pamper those roses more than you ever pampered me." And I would laugh, saying, "They listen better." The truth was, those roses had become my measure of survival. Tending to them each morning was how I remembered that life continues, that beauty can grow from soil soaked with loss. When the pain of his absence became unbearable, I wrote. Each night I sat at my oak desk and filled the leather-bound journal with words that might never be read. Ink and paper became my confession booth, my battlefield, and my anchor. In those pages, I bled my doubts and my rage, but I also carved out gratitude so that grief did not drown me completely. Tonight, I wanted to open that journal, to write down the betrayal unfolding around me, but my hand refused. Instead, I clutched the watch. That single object reminded me that some promises never dissolve. The clock in the hallway struck 8, a sharp chime that sliced the stillness. I spoke aloud, though no one could hear. "Thomas, if you could see what Ethan is doing, you would be furious. But you would also tell me not to tremble. You would tell me to fight." A knock startled me, not at the door, but in my memory. The last conversation I had with Ethan after his father's funeral returned with force. "Mom, I'll take care of everything now," he had said, chest puffed as if he had already inherited the world. I had smiled, weary but grateful. "You're young, Ethan. Don't try to carry too much." He replied quickly, almost sharply, "I don't have a choice. You can't do it forever." At the time, I thought it was grief speaking. Now I realized it was ambition. I pressed the watch to my lips and whispered, "He wants to erase me, Tom." The ticking inside the watch was faint, but I imagined it answering me with each beat. I forced myself to stand straighter. My spine ached, but my resolve was sharpening. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and let the hiss of boiling water remind me that life requires heat to transform. The steam curled upward, fogging the window. I traced a finger through the condensation and drew a single word: strength. As I waited, I rehearsed what Marion had said. Powers of attorney, health proxies, trust transfers. Each term carried the weight of finality. Once signed, they would not only strip me of authority, but brand me as incapable. To Ethan, it would mean victory. To me, it would mean death while still breathing. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over chamomile leaves, the fragrance earthy and soothing. As I cradled the cup, I thought of the dozens of evenings Thomas and I had shared tea together. He always joked that tea was too gentle for him, but he drank it anyway because I asked. Those small acts of compromise built a marriage, and now, in the absence of compromise, my son was preparing war against his own mother. I sat again at the desk and finally opened my journal. The page stared at me, blank but demanding. I began to write, my hand steady. Tonight I learned that trust can be a noose. My son Ethan intends to bind me with my own signature. He dresses control in the language of care. He speaks of protection, but he plots my erasure. I cannot allow it. I will not allow it. The words looked harsh on the page, but they matched the storm inside me. I imagined the dinner party tomorrow, the polished glasses, the clink of silverware, the polite laughter. And then Ethan sliding the papers across the table with a smile, Vanessa at his side, her eyes glinting with silent pressure. They would expect me to sign without question, the way so many parents surrender out of love or exhaustion. But Marion's warning had lit a fire I did not know I still carried. I stood again and spoke aloud, as if practicing for that moment. No, Ethan. If you believe I am unfit, then let the court decide. I will not surrender with ink on paper. The firmness in my own voice startled me. It no longer sounded like a grieving widow. It sounded like a commander reclaiming ground. I returned to the watch and opened its cover once more. The hands ticked toward 9. I remembered Thomas laughing the day he bought it at a small shop in Savannah. It's old but reliable, he had said. Like us. Reliable. That word clung to me now. I had been reliable all my life, for my husband, for my son, for the company, for every cause but myself. Perhaps it was time to be reliable for me. I slipped the watch into my pocket, feeling its weight settle against my chest. Then I closed the journal with a snap. Tomorrow would not be a surrender. Tomorrow would be a test. The rain outside slowed, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet soil. My roses would stand taller after this storm, their roots drinking strength from the hardship. So would I. I whispered one last promise into the empty room. Thomas, I will not let him bury me alive. He will learn that his mother is not so easily erased. The clock chimed again, steady and unyielding. I drew in a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Ethan was born with his father's broad shoulders and my restless eyes. He grew into a man who carried both pride and pressure like a tailored suit. By 40, he was already a real estate director in Charleston, commanding glass towers and waterfront properties as if he had been destined to shape the skyline. People admired his ambition, but I saw something else buried beneath his polished exterior. A hunger to control everything, a hunger that sharpened after Thomas died. It was as if losing his father snapped a thread, leaving him convinced that only by gripping tighter could he keep the world from unraveling. I still remember his wedding a decade earlier. It was held in a ballroom lined with crystal chandeliers, gold-rimmed glasses catching the light like stars. I wore navy silk, my heart swelling as I watched him wait at the altar, nervous yet proud. When Vanessa walked toward him in a gown that shimmered like frost, he smiled in a way that made me believe happiness had truly returned to our family. That day I thought the future was safe. I thought I could breathe. Vanessa was radiant, but not because of her gown. She carried herself like a woman who had fought her way into a world that once seemed unreachable. Raised in a small working-class neighborhood, she had learned early that appearances could open doors faster than honesty. She told me once, "If people think you're perfect, they'll never ask what you're hiding." At the time, I brushed it off as ambition. I didn't realize it was her creed. In the early years of their marriage, she visited me often. She brought flowers to my kitchen table, arranging them neatly while complimenting my roses outside. She would say, "Mother Harding, you inspire me. One day I hope people look at Ethan and me and see the perfect couple." I would smile politely, warmed by the sweetness in her tone, yet unsettled by the word perfect. Life had taught me that perfection was a mask, and masks never last. As time passed, those visits grew shorter, replaced by grand gatherings at their house. Their home became a showroom, polished marble floors, silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, guests clinking champagne glasses under Vanessa's watchful eye. Every corner whispered wealth and image. I would stand in the midst of it, feeling both proud and invisible, like a painting hung for nostalgia rather than belonging. The fractures began subtly. Ethan started speaking to me as though I were fragile glass. At first, it sounded like affection. "Mom, you don't need to worry about these contracts. I'll handle them. Just sign here and let me carry the weight." His hand would slide the paper forward, his voice low and persuasive. To anyone else it might sound protective, but to me it rang like a lock clicking shut. Vanessa was sharper. She dressed her words in velvet, but they cut all the same. "Mother, don't you think it would be easier if you stepped back? Families look strongest when there's no confusion, when one generation knows when to let go. Imagine how complete we would look, how admired." She would smile, her manicured fingers resting lightly on my arm, but her eyes dared me to resist. Each time, I would press my hand into my pocket, feeling the pocket watch. I would answer simply, "I am not confused. I still know who I am." Their responses never changed. Ethan would sigh, a sound thick with impatience. Vanessa would tilt her head, lips curling into a polite half-smile, and I would feel myself shrinking in their picture of perfection. There was one evening that revealed more than they intended. It was a dinner at their house, candlelight flickering against polished silver. I had cooked a casserole, the kind Thomas loved, and brought it as my contribution. Vanessa placed it on the sideboard untouched. Throughout the evening, she directed the conversation, praising Ethan's new projects, highlighting their charitable donations, listing their travel plans to Europe. Then, almost casually, she leaned toward me and said, "Mother, imagine how peaceful your life would be if you let us manage everything. You could spend your days in the garden without a care." The guests smiled, assuming it was kindness, but I heard the steel beneath the sugar. I replied, "Peace is not the same as erasure." She looked away quickly, her expression unreadable, but I caught Ethan's glare, sharp and quick like lightning. That night, when I returned home, I opened my journal and wrote, "I am a fracture in their picture, a crack they cannot polish away. They think if they press long enough, I will give. They do not know my roots run deep." In the weeks that followed, their tactics intensified. Ethan brought stacks of documents, each one longer than the last. "Mom, these are just formalities. Sign them and everything will run smoother." Vanessa added her velvet touch. "It's for your dignity, Mother. People respect families that are organized. Don't you want that for us?" Their words were honeyed, but the bitterness lingered. They weren't asking me, they were cornering me. I could feel it with every tightened smile, every careful phrase. I remember one particular confrontation in Ethan's office. He stood before a wall of glass, the Charleston skyline glowing behind him. He turned to me, arms folded, his voice calm but commanding. "Mom, stop making this harder than it has to be. You raised me to lead. Let me lead." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Leading is not the same as taking. You confuse ambition with love." His jaw clenched, the mask slipping for just a second. Then he forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. In that moment, I realized the son I once knew, the boy who held my hand at Thomas's funeral, who promised to protect me, was buried beneath ambition and Vanessa's relentless hunger for perfection. What stood before me was not protection, it was conquest. I left his office that night with the city lights reflecting on the glass, reminding me of his glittering wedding years ago. How far we had traveled from that day of joy. The glow that once felt like security now felt like fire consuming the walls around me. I walked into the cool night air and whispered to myself, "I am not a fracture. I am the foundation, and they will not paint over me." It began quietly, the way cracks appear in glass long before the pane shatters. Ethan's voice carried a gentleness that didn't quite reach his eyes. One afternoon, as we sat in my kitchen drinking tea, he placed his hand over mine and said, "Mom, you've been working too hard. Maybe it's time to slow down, maybe even step back from the company. Think about yourself for once." The words might have sounded kind to anyone else, but I caught the edge beneath them. Thomas used to encourage me to rest too, but never in a way that suggested I was obsolete. Ethan's tone implied the opposite. I smiled faintly. "I still enjoy the work, Ethan. It keeps me sharp." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "But why? You've earned the right to stop. Let me carry the weight now." "I'm not asking you to carry me," I replied. "I'm asking you to respect that I'm still capable." He laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Stubborn as ever." His eyes flicked toward the pocket watch I kept on the table, as if he resented its presence. Then came Vanessa, with her practiced sweetness. One evening she stopped by, bringing glossy brochures. She unfolded them across my kitchen table. Photographs of manicured lawns, sunlit libraries, and smiling seniors playing bridge. "Mother," she said warmly, "look at this place. It's one of the most elegant retirement communities in South Carolina. Imagine you, surrounded by friends your age, cared for, admired. Wouldn't it be lovely?" I studied the photos. The buildings gleamed. The grass was impossibly green. But what I saw was confinement wrapped in luxury. "Vanessa," I said carefully, "my home is my garden. My books are here. My memories are here. I don't need chandeliers to feel alive." Her smile never faltered, though her eyes narrowed just enough for me to notice. Of course. I just thought you might enjoy the piece." She slid the brochures back into her bag, leaving behind a faint trace of perfume and a heavier trace of intent. The signs multiplied. At the office, I discovered Ethan had revised one of my decisions without telling me. I had approved a conservative expansion strategy. He replaced it with a riskier plan, presenting it as if it were his idea. At the board meeting, when I pointed out the discrepancy, he interrupted smoothly. "Mom, maybe you misremembered. It happens." Laughter rippled across the room, polite but stinging. I caught Vanessa's delicate smile as she sat in the back, her hand resting gracefully on her lap. She looked proud, almost triumphant, while I was painted as out of touch. That night I walked through my rose garden in the dark, the air heavy with the scent of damp soil. I replayed the moment, the chuckles, the smirk. My hand clenched around a thorn until it pricked my skin. Pain bloomed, sharp and clarifying. I whispered into the night, "They are softening the ground, preparing the stage." Another time at a family dinner, I made a comment about how we once balanced our finances carefully during the recession. Ethan rolled his eyes in front of the others. "Mom, that was decades ago. Times have changed. We don't need to cling to outdated methods." Vanessa's laughter followed quickly, a light tinkle meant to ease tension. But her words landed heavy. "Don't be offended, Mother. He just means you can relax now. Let the new generation take over." I looked around the table. A few guests smiled awkwardly, uncertain whether to side with me or with them. The humiliation burned more than the wine in my throat. Later that evening, as I wrote in my journal by lamplight, I paused with the pen trembling above the page. Finally I wrote, "False concern often wears a gentle face." Each incident was small enough to deny, but together they formed a mosaic of betrayal. I began to see patterns in their words, in the way they positioned themselves in conversations, in how they spoke of the future, as if I were already gone. One afternoon, I overheard them in the hallway outside Ethan's office. Vanessa's voice was low but sharp. "She clings to everything. We have to push harder, or she'll never let go." Ethan muttered back, "She'll sign. She always trusts me." I stepped away before they noticed me, my pulse hammering. My hand found the pocket watch, steady and cold, and I remembered Thomas's warning. Never sign when your heart feels uneasy. My unease had become a constant companion. From that day on, I began documenting everything. Not just meetings or business decisions, but tones, gestures, words. I wrote it all down in my journal, line by line. If they wanted to treat me as if I were fading, I would prove I was sharper than ever. I also began to notice their choreography at gatherings. Ethan would present himself as the responsible son, Vanessa as the devoted daughter-in-law. Together they created a performance of care, and I was expected to play the role of the aging matriarch ready to hand over the crown. But I had no intention of surrendering. The final straw came at another company event. A junior employee mentioned an upcoming project, asking for my opinion. Before I could answer, Ethan cut in with a smile. "Mom doesn't keep track of all the details anymore. That's my job." The employee laughed nervously, then turned back to him. My words were stolen before they left my mouth. I returned home that night, sat at my desk, and opened my journal. The page absorbed my fury as I wrote, "They are not protecting me. They are erasing me." I looked at the watch ticking on the desk and felt a surge of clarity. My son and his wife believed their performance was flawless, that I would mistake their ambition for concern. But the mask was slipping, and I could see the cracks. The warning signs were no longer whispers. They were sirens. It was late afternoon when the knock came. The sun was sinking, bleeding orange light across my rose garden. I opened the door expecting a neighbor, but instead found a young man shifting nervously on my porch. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie knotted too tightly, and in his hands he clutched a folder as if it might burn him. "Mrs. Harding," he said, his voice low. "I'm Noah Ramirez. I used to work with your husband before he passed. May I come in? It's important." Something in his eyes, a mix of fear and urgency, made me step aside. He entered quietly, scanning the house with respect, not curiosity. When we reached the kitchen, I gestured for him to sit. "What brings you here, Noah?" I asked, cautious but calm. He slid the folder across the table. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. I shouldn't even have this, but I couldn't ignore it. Ethan sent this email to a potential investor last week. I made a copy before it could disappear." I opened the folder. On the page was Ethan's name, bold and undeniable. The words beneath cut like glass. "Once Mom signs, I'll consolidate all assets." For a moment, my throat closed. I traced the sentence with my finger, every letter proof that Marion's warning had been real. My son wasn't just planning. He was boasting about my signature, certain he would get it. I forced my voice steady. "How did you come across this?" Noah shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking toward the window before settling back on me. "I handle some of the back-end accounting. I noticed unusual drafts being saved to the company's server. Most were harmless, memos, projections. But this was different. It wasn't business. It was personal strategy. I knew it was wrong." I looked at him carefully. He couldn't have been more than 26. His youth was apparent in the nervous way he wrung his hands. But there was a steadiness, too, a fire in his gaze that reminded me of Thomas when he first built the company. "You risked your job bringing this to me," I said. "Why?" He swallowed hard before answering. "Because I know what it feels like when family takes what isn't theirs." My father built a small repair shop in Colombia. He worked himself into an early grave, and when he died, his own brothers pushed my mother out. Papers she didn't understand, promises they never kept. By the time she realized, everything was gone. He died believing his family would protect us, but they didn't. I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone else if I could stop it. His voice cracked, but his jaw tightened. I felt my own chest tighten in response. This young man, burdened by his father's betrayal, had seen through the facade Ethan and Vanessa so carefully maintained. He wasn't just an employee. He was a witness to what unchecked ambition could destroy. I closed the folder slowly, letting the weight of the evidence settle in my hands. "Noah," I said, "you have no idea what you've given me. This is light in a very dark room." He shook his head. "I do know. I've been watching. Ethan speaks about you like you're in the way, not the foundation. And Vanessa, she spins every word to sound like care, but she doesn't mean it. People in the office see it, even if they won't admit it. I can't sit by while they try to erase you." His words struck deeper than he knew. For weeks I had felt myself shrinking under their performance, doubting my own instincts. But here was proof, delivered by a man who had no reason to protect me except his own conscience. I leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, do others suspect what they're doing?" Noah hesitated. "Some do. A few whisper. But most prefer silence. They want to keep their jobs. They laugh at Ethan's jokes, not at Vanessa's plans. They think it's safer not to see." I sat back, my hand curling around the pocket watch in my apron pocket, the metal pressed firm against my palm, steadying me. Thomas would have called this moment providence, the right person at the right time. "Noah," I said firmly, "you may be young, but you've done something many twice your age would never risk. You've told the truth. I won't forget that." He exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I don't need anything in return, Mrs. Harding. I just need to know you won't sign, that you'll fight." I met his eyes. "I will not sign. Not tonight, not ever. If Ethan wants a war, he'll get one. But I won't fight with rage alone. I'll fight with proof, with people who value truth, people like you." His lips pressed into a thin line. Then he nodded. "Then you're not alone." Silence filled the kitchen, but it wasn't the heavy silence of betrayal. It was lighter, charged with resolve. Outside, the sky darkened, the first stars appearing. I walked him to the door, the folder tucked under my arm like a weapon. Before he left, he turned back. "My father used to say, ink can be as sharp as a knife. Just make sure it cuts the right way." I watched him disappear down the path, his figure swallowed by the streetlights. Then I looked down at the folder again. Ethan's words glared back at me, arrogant and certain. Once Mom signs, but I would not. And with Noah's help, I finally had more than suspicion. I had evidence. That night, as I sat at my desk and opened my journal, I wrote with a hand steadier than it had been in weeks. Today, light entered my darkness. The young remember and the young resist. Betrayal is not the whole story. There is still truth. I closed the journal, placed the pocket watch on top of it, and whispered into the silence, "Thomas, I am not fighting this battle alone anymore." The ticking of the watch answered me, and for the first time since this storm began, I felt something close to hope. The night of Ethan's birthday arrived with the kind of grandeur that belonged more to a gala than a family gathering. His villa stood at the edge of Charleston's harbor, glass walls aglow, chandeliers blazing like constellations captured indoors. Valets hurried, guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits spilled laughter onto the stone steps, and music drifted through the open doors. A string quartet playing softly, elegant and precise. I walked inside with measured steps, the silver pocket watch heavy in my palm, hidden in the folds of my dress. Every tick reminded me to stay steady. The scent of expensive wine and polished wood filled the air, but beneath it all was something acrid, something false. Ethan met me halfway across the marble floor. His smile was perfect, wide enough to impress the guests who watched us. He kissed my cheek lightly, then guided me toward the long dining table where gold-rimmed plates gleamed under candlelight. "Mom," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the charm of a practiced host, "I'm so glad you came. Tonight is about family, about us." Vanessa appeared at his side, her hand brushing my shoulder like silk, her perfume lingering too long. She looked radiant, every hair pinned into place, her cream-colored dress chosen not for warmth, but for performance. "Mother Harding," she said sweetly, "this night wouldn't be complete without you. You're the center of it all." I smiled faintly, but my chest tightened. Their eyes betrayed them. Behind Ethan's glow was tension. Behind Vanessa's warmth was calculation. Dinner unfolded with chatter and clinking glasses. Guests toasted Ethan's success, praised Vanessa's poise, and congratulated them as if they were royalty. I spoke little, my ears tuned for the moment I knew would come. and it came. As dessert plates were cleared, Ethan rose from his seat at the head of the table. He tapped his glass gently, drawing silence. Then, with a deliberate smile, he walked to me and placed a leather folder in front of my plate. "Mom," he said, voice carrying just enough volume for everyone to hear. "This is for you. Just a few documents. Nothing complicated. There's simply insurance to protect you, to make sure you'll always be cared for. I thought tonight, surrounded by family, would be the perfect time." The room fell into a hush, every eye flicking to me. My fingers brushed the folder, the cool leather prickling my skin. Ethan's gaze was fixed, unwavering, daring me to resist. Before I could speak, Vanessa leaned forward, her manicured hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Her smile was tender, but her eyes were ice. "Please, Mother, think of the future. Imagine how perfect it will be when everything is secure, when you can rest without worry. This is love, not pressure." I felt the weight of their trap closing in, the performance polished to perfection. Ethan's confidence radiated across the table. Vanessa's touch whispered control. To anyone else, it might look like devotion, but I could see the claws behind the velvet. I tightened my grip on Thomas's watch in my pocket, its metal edges digging into my palm until it hurt. That pain sharpened me. I drew a slow breath, lifted the pen Ethan had placed beside the folder, and let its tip hover above the paper. The guests leaned forward, expecting compliance, expecting surrender. Then I placed the pen flat on the table. Calmly, I raised my eyes to meet Ethan's. My voice was steady, each word deliberate. "If you truly believe I am no longer capable of deciding for myself, then let the court prove it. I will not sign away my life because you tell me to. Not tonight, not ever." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the quartet outside faltered, their notes trailing off. Ethan's face twitched, the perfect smile slipping for just a moment. Anger flashed in his eyes, quick and sharp, before he forced his expression back into composure. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the back of his chair. Vanessa, however, did not flinch. She kept her smile, her hand still on my shoulder, but her eyes hardened into something glacial. "Mother," she whispered so only I could hear, "you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of all these people. Think carefully." I turned my head just enough to meet her gaze. "I have thought carefully, and I see you both clearly." Her fingers slipped away from my shoulder, her mask still intact, but the chill in her eyes deepened. Around the table, guests shifted uncomfortably. A few cleared their throats, others looked down at their plates, unsure whether to speak. The air itself seemed to freeze, heavy with tension. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands over the watch in my lap. My voice was calm, but it carried a blade. "This conversation is over. The matter will be settled where truth belongs, in the open, before the law." Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose, his facade cracking. "You're making a mistake, Mom. You're tired, and you don't see what we're trying to do for you." I met his glare without blinking. "No, Ethan, the mistake would be mine if I trusted false concern dressed as love." The silence stretched, thick as stone. Then, slowly, conversations resumed in hushed tones, the party stumbling back to life, though no one's laughter rang as freely as before. The performance had cracked, and everyone in that room knew it. I rose from the table, the folder untouched, the pen abandoned. As I walked toward the door, the watch pressed firmly against my palm, ticking steadily, reminding me I was still in control. Behind me, I felt Ethan's anger burn like fire, and Vanessa's cold smile follow me like a shadow. But they had underestimated me. I was not a fragile relic to be managed. I was still the foundation, and tonight I had shown them I would not crumble. When I returned home, the house was darker than I remembered. The quiet swallowed me as soon as I closed the door behind me, the echo of Ethan's voice still ringing in my ears. I walked slowly to the parlor, where the rain had left streaks on the window panes. Outside, the roses glistened under the silver light of the moon, each petal heavy with water. They bent, but did not break. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, and for the first time in years, I admitted to myself, my son was no longer the boy who once ran barefoot through those same roses, his laughter carrying like music across the yard. I whispered into the emptiness, "Ethan, where did you go? And what replaced you?" The ache in my chest was sharp, but alongside it came something colder, harder. That dinner had stripped away my illusions. Ethan wasn't confused or misguided. He was deliberate. He had rehearsed every word, every smile, every gesture with Vanessa by his side. Together, they had built a stage, and I was meant to be the fool who signed her life away. I moved to the wooden chair by the window, the chair where Thomas once read the morning paper. I sat, my hands folded tightly around his silver pocket watch. The ticking was steady, almost defiant. It was the only sound that did not lie to me. The image of Ethan sliding the folder across the table replayed in my mind over and over until it felt like a wound reopening with each memory, and Vanessa's hand, soft on my shoulder, her voice sweet as honey, whispering poison. Think of the perfect future. I thought of the past instead. Ethan as a child, bringing me dandelions from the yard, his cheeks flushed with pride. Ethan at 14, standing tall beside Thomas at the hardware store, promising he would one day take care of me. Ethan at his wedding, radiant and hopeful. Those memories were still mine, but tonight they felt like strangers. I rose and lit the lamp on my writing desk. Its glow spread across the pages of my journal, waiting, demanding truth. I dipped the pen and began to write, the words flowing without pause. Family is not measured by smiles across a dinner table. It is measured by honesty, by loyalty when no one else is watching. Tonight, my son showed me a mask. Behind it, he has forgotten the very thing that binds us, truth. They speak of love, but what they offer is control. They speak of protection, but what they demand is surrender. The ink bled into the paper, thick and unyielding. I signed my name at the bottom of the page as if I were swearing an oath. The clock struck midnight, its chime resonating through the house like a reminder that time does not bend for betrayal. I sat back, closing my eyes. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with realization. Ethan's ambition was not a phase. Vanessa's hunger for recognition was not insecurity. Together, they had chosen this path, and they would not stop. A storm of thoughts collided in my mind, but one rose above the rest. I could not fight this battle with sorrow alone. Grief for the son I once knew would not protect me. Only clarity, only resolve, only proof would. I stood and walked into the kitchen, pouring water into the kettle. The hiss of steam filled the air, sharp and alive. As the scent of chamomile rose, I felt the weight of exhaustion press against me. My body was weary, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I carried the tea back to the window. The roses outside stood resilient, jeweled by rain, their roots deep in the soil Thomas had once tilled. Watching them, I realized that endurance is not softness. It is strength disguised. They did not resist the storm, but they did not surrender either. That was the lesson I needed. I whispered, "I will not surrender." The words steadied me more than the tea, more than the ticking watch, more than the ink on the page. They were not a promise to Ethan or Vanessa. They were a promise to myself, to Thomas, to the life we had built together. As the night deepened, I replayed Marion's warning, Noah's bravery, and the cold eyes of my son and his wife. Every detail sharpened the truth. The battle ahead would not be about papers or signatures. It would be about dignity, about whether I would allow myself to be erased. I set the empty cup down, returned to the journal, and wrote one last line before closing it. Blood is not enough. Without truth, family becomes a prison. Tonight, I chose the key. When I finally rose from the desk, dawn was breaking faintly at the edges of the sky. The long night was over, but the fight was only beginning. The knock came long after midnight, sharp against the wooden door, startling me out of the stillness. The rain had stopped, but the night was heavy, the air thick with the smell of wet soil drifting in from the garden. I rose from the chair by the window, Thomas's pocket watch clenched in my hand. When I opened the door, Ethan stood on the porch, his suit jacket still on, his tie loosened, his face caught somewhere between charm and rage. "Mom," he said softly, too softly, "why didn't you sign? Why don't you trust me?" The words were sweetened, but his eyes betrayed the steel behind them. He stepped inside without waiting for me to answer, his shoes leaving faint marks on the rug. I closed the door slowly, steadying myself. "You came here in the middle of the night to ask me that?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. He sighed, forcing a smile. "I only want to take care of you. You've carried everything for so long. Don't you think you deserve rest? Don't you think you can finally let someone else carry the burden?" I met his gaze, unblinking. "Rest is not the same as erasure, Ethan. And I don't think taking everything from me is the kind of care your father and I raised you to believe in." His jaw tightened, his hand twitching slightly at his side. "You make it sound ugly, but it's not. It's order. It's protection. It's the right thing for this family." I let out a short laugh, dry and cutting. "So this is how you repay me. All the years I worked, all the nights I stayed awake to keep this family afloat, and your gratitude is to sign me away with ink. Tell me, Ethan, was it Vanessa's idea or yours?" His eyes narrowed. "Does it matter? We both want what's best, and if you can't see that, then maybe—" He hesitated, then spat the words with precision. "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe you are slipping." The words landed like a knife, but I did not flinch. Instead, I pressed the cool watch tighter into my palm, letting the edges cut into my skin. I lifted it slightly so the lamplight caught the silver. "If I am slipping, Ethan, then at least I'll slip with the truth in my hands. And when the time comes, it will not be your lies that outlast me. It will be the truth." For a moment, silence filled the room. The clock ticked steadily, indifferent to the storm between us. His mask cracked then, the charm peeling away to reveal raw frustration. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a growl. "If you refuse to sign, if you keep resisting, people will think you're delusional. They'll believe you've lost your mind. The board, the staff, the investors, they'll see you as nothing more than an old woman clinging to power." I straightened, my voice cutting clean. "Let them think what they want. I will not surrender to fear, least of all yours. If I have to stand alone, I will. And if they ever doubt, they'll see the evidence, not your rehearsed speeches." His teeth clenched, his breath sharp through his nose. For the first time, his confidence faltered. He had expected pleading, maybe anger, but not calm defiance. I took a step forward, closing the distance, and spoke low but steady. "I am not afraid of their whispers. I am afraid of raising a son who has forgotten what honesty looks like. Do not confuse my age for weakness. I am still your mother, and I will not be erased." He stared at me, his chest rising and falling too fast, like a boxer waiting for the bell. Then, with a suddenness that startled even himself, he turned on his heel and headed for the door. His hand lingered on the knob, his shoulders tense. "You'll regret this," he said, not turning back. I answered without hesitation. "No, Ethan, you will." He left, slamming the door behind him. The echo rattled through the house, but I stood unmoved, the watch still steady in my palm. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of roses through the cracks. My body trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. That night, I sat at my desk once more, the ink flowing fast across the page. They want me silenced by signatures, by rumors, by fear, but I will not sign, and I will not fall silent. If they insist on war, then they will learn I am still stronger than they ever imagined. I closed the journal, set the watch on top, and let the silence settle once more. The battle had come to my door in the dark, but I had faced it, and I had not broken. The following morning, I walked into Marion Cole's office with the pocket watch pressed against my palm. The building was one Thomas had known well. He had closed dozens of deals here. his confidence echoing through these very halls. Now I was walking into the same place, not as a builder of legacies, but as a defender of one. Marion's office was perched on the second floor, its tall windows spilling sunlight across dark oak furniture. The air smelled faintly of leather, ink, and the sharp tang of coffee. When I stepped inside, Marion was already waiting, her sleeves rolled up, her desk spread with folders and binders, like weapons laid out before battle. "Quinn," she said firmly, rising to greet me. Her handshake was brief but strong. "We don't have time to waste. Sit." I lowered myself into the chair across from her desk. My eyes swept over the documents. I saw thick medical reports with embossed seals, spreadsheets with sharp lines of numbers, and printed emails marked with bold red tabs. At the top of one stack was a page I recognized instantly. Ethan's email, the one Noah had given me, the one that read in cold black ink, "Once Mom signs, I'll consolidate all assets." Marion placed her glasses on the bridge of her nose and began with precision. "We have 3 pillars, Quinn: medical, financial, and ethical. If Ethan wants to paint you as unstable, we'll dismantle his lies with facts." She slid the first binder toward me. Inside were evaluations from 2 different doctors, each stating clearly that I had no cognitive decline. The words were clinical, but their meaning was fire. I wasn't slipping. I wasn't confused. I was whole, and the evidence proved it. "Here," Marion said, tapping the page, "is the baseline of your defense. He cannot argue with doctors' signatures. He cannot erase these dates." I nodded, tracing the lines with my eyes, each one steadying me like a lifeline. Then she reached for another binder, heavier, packed with graphs and reports. "Financials," she announced. "These are the numbers under your leadership: growth rates, client retention, expansion projects completed under your direct oversight. If Ethan claims you're clinging to the past, we show them you're outperforming the future." The pages gleamed with ink, charts rising year over year, margins solid, deals signed and sealed. I saw my own initials at the bottom of contracts, the record of decisions I had made and stood by. I whispered, almost to myself, "They want to erase me with a pen. But these signatures are mine. They tell the real story." Marion looked up sharply, her voice carrying steel. "Exactly. This isn't about defending your honor, Quinn. This is about exposing theirs." She pulled out the final folder and laid it flat between us. The first page was an email, Ethan's words projected in bold. "Support me now, and bonuses will follow once I assume control." There were more. Threads with managers, promises of rewards, subtle threats disguised as opportunity. I felt my stomach twist. "He bribed them," I said flatly. Marion's expression was grim. "He didn't just bribe them. He built an alliance on false promises. That makes him vulnerable. Once the board sees these, he won't look like a savior. He'll look like a fraud." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the watch pressing against my palm. The ticking inside it seemed louder here, like Thomas himself was keeping count. Marion leaned forward, her tone deliberate. "We will not go into this trial as victims. Ethan and Vanessa want to corner you into defense, to make you prove you still belong at the head of your own life. But I won't play by their script. We will attack. We will show their motives, their methods, their lies. We will not only protect your dignity, we will dismantle theirs." The words struck deep, like a bell ringing through stone. For weeks I had felt reactive, cornered, bracing against every strike. But here, in this room, I felt the shift. Marion wasn't asking me to endure. She was asking me to fight. My hand steadied against the desk. "For too long," I said slowly, "I believed that family could excuse betrayal, that love could cover ambition, but no longer. It's time the truth stands in the light, even if it shames my own blood." Marion's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Good, because the courtroom doesn't reward silence. It rewards proof. And we have it. She began organizing the piles, her hands moving with surgical precision. One stack for medical reports, another for financials, a third for ethical misconduct. The sound of paper sliding against wood filled the air, a rhythm like drums before a march. I added quietly, "Thomas used to say, if you want respect, speak with numbers and truth. The rest is noise." He was right. Marian met my gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Then let's cut through the noise." The clock on the wall ticked toward noon, each second sharpening my resolve. I imagined Ethan's face at the dinner table, his mask of charm, Vanessa's smile hiding knives. They had underestimated me, believed I would crumble in silence. But here, surrounded by binders of proof and anchored by the watch in my palm, I knew the truth was louder than their whispers. I closed the top folder firmly, the sound echoing in the room. "Marian," I said, my voice clear, "it's time. No more waiting. No more pretending. It's time the truth speaks louder than blood." She nodded once, with finality. "Then we fight." The sunlight shifted across the desk, catching the edge of Ethan's damning email, illuminating the words like scripture. "Once Mom signs, I'll consolidate all assets." But I would not sign, and when the trial came, those words would burn him, not me. I rose from the chair, slipped the pocket watch back into my coat, and whispered so only I could hear, "Thomas, I am ready." The call came on a gray afternoon, the kind of day when the clouds hung low and heavy, pressing down on Charleston like a weight. It was Charles Whitmore, an old friend of Thomas and one of the senior members of the board. His voice over the line was polite but tight, asking if I could meet him privately at the Harbor Club downtown. I agreed, though something in my chest already knew the conversation would not bring comfort. When I arrived, Charles was waiting in a corner booth. The room smelled of cigars and old leather, filled with men who thought themselves the keepers of wisdom. Charles stood as I approached, his hair thinner than I remembered, his shoulders stooped. But his handshake was still firm, the way Thomas used to greet him after late board meetings. We sat, and for a while we exchanged pleasantries. Memories of Thomas, mentions of the old days when we fought to keep the company alive through recessions. But his eyes avoided mine. His fingers tapped against the table as though rehearsing the rhythm of his betrayal. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Quinn, I'll speak plainly. The company needs younger leadership. Ethan has energy, vision, the kind of drive investors crave. You've done well, no one denies it. But times have changed. It's time to let go." The words cut deeper than I expected. Not because I hadn't prepared for them, I had heard the whispers, but because they came from him. Charles had stood beside Thomas for decades. He had toasted us at our wedding anniversary, had carried our son on his shoulders at company picnics. He had been part of the fabric of our family. I forced my voice to remain steady. "Charles, you know better than anyone what it took to build this company. Thomas gave his life to it. I gave mine. And now you would hand it to Ethan, a man who has not yet proven he can protect it without tearing it apart?" He sighed, his shoulders heavy. "It's not about loyalty, Quinn. It's about perception. Investors want someone younger at the helm. Ethan knows how to speak their language. You represent the past. The company cannot afford nostalgia." I leaned forward, my voice low, sharp. "Is that what Thomas is now? Nostalgia?" Charles's gaze faltered, but he pressed on. "Don't make this harder than it is. Ethan can lead. You should accept it, step aside gracefully. Let the company evolve." Gracefully. The words stung like acid. I sat back, my hands tightening in my lap. I wanted to remind him of every decision I had made, every deal I had salvaged, every time I had stood in front of a room full of doubters and proved them wrong. But I knew none of it mattered. His mind was already elsewhere, turned toward Ethan's promises. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the clink of glasses from another table. Finally, I said, "You disappoint me, Charles. I thought friendship meant standing together, not turning when the wind shifts." He looked down at his drink. "I'm sorry, Quinn. Truly. But this is the way of things." I rose from the booth, slipping Thomas's pocket watch into my hand. The cool silver steadied me. "The way of things," I said quietly, "is no excuse for betrayal." I left him there, staring into the amber depths of his whiskey, and stepped out into the damp Charleston air. The harbor smelled of salt and iron, the kind of scent that clings to memory. My chest felt hollow, but my steps were firm. That evening, back at home, I sat at my desk with the lamp burning low. The roses outside were bending in the night wind, their petals scattering across the wet grass. I opened my leather journal, dipped my pen, and wrote, "Even memory has its traitors. Men who once stood beside us now turn away, offering polite words as they hand our legacy to strangers. But truth does not change with age, and loyalty cannot be bought with the promise of youth." The ink dried heavy on the page, each word carved into the fibers as if refusing to fade. I closed the book and placed the pocket watch on top of it. Its ticking filled the silence like a heartbeat. Betrayal had come not only from my son and his wife, but now from a man who had once been like family. And yet, instead of despair, I felt something sharper rising in me, resolve. Charles might have turned, the board might whisper, but I still had the truth, and the truth would not betray me. 2 days after my meeting with Charles, the doorbell rang just as dawn spilled gold across the garden. I was still in my robe, my journal open on the desk, when I saw Noah Ramirez standing on the porch. His young face was pale, his hand clutching a manila envelope like it carried fire. I let him in, the scent of wet roses following us inside. He didn't waste time. His voice was low, urgent. "Mrs. Harding, I found something. You need to see this." We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from the tea I poured. He slid the envelope across. My fingers trembled as I drew out the papers. The first was a polished document, formatted with company letterhead, bold at the top. Leadership Transition Proposal. My son's name filled the page, his title already typed as if the decision had been made. Interim CEO Ethan Harding. The date struck me like a blow. It had been written the day before his birthday dinner. I stared at the words until they blurred. Noah's voice cut through the haze. This wasn't a draft. It was circulated quietly to senior advisors. He was positioning himself before he ever asked you to sign. The dinner, it was just a performance. I pressed the pocket watch into my palm, its ticking a counter to my fury. My voice came out steady, though it felt like glass shattering inside me. "So he planned my funeral while I was still alive." Noah's eyes darkened. "That's exactly what it is. And there's more." He pulled out another paper, an email thread marked confidential. At the top, from Vanessa Harding. The message beneath read, "Support Ethan during this transition, and bonuses will be distributed once he takes office." The names of recipients leapt from the page, department heads, senior staff, even Charles's assistant. Each one promised loyalty purchased not with respect, but with money. I whispered, "She bought their silence." Noah nodded. "She's clever, but reckless. These messages were saved on the shared drive. She must have thought no one would ever dig deep enough to see them." The words burned into me. Vanessa's smile, sweet and polished, now revealed itself for what it was: currency. She hadn't married my son for love of family. She had married him for the crown, and together they had decided to bury me alive beneath it. I pushed the papers away, my chest tight. "Why are you helping me, Noah? You're young. You have your whole career ahead of you. Siding with me could cost you everything." He looked down, then back at me, his voice breaking. "Because I watched my father lose everything. His brother manipulated him, took his land, left him with nothing. He drank himself to death, Mrs. Harding. And I swore if I ever saw someone walking into the same trap, I wouldn't stay silent, not again." I swallowed hard. For a moment, I saw not just Noah, but a younger Thomas, defiant, principled, unwilling to bow to betrayal. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "Then you've honored your father tonight, and you've reminded me of mine." The clock ticked loudly in the quiet kitchen. I gathered the documents, stacking them neatly as if arranging gravestones. The proposal, the email, the promises of betrayal, proof that my son and his wife had already written me out of the story. I whispered, almost to myself, "They see me as a relic, a name to be erased, a chair to be emptied. But I am not done. They will not bury me alive." Noah's eyes locked with mine, fierce. "Then let's show them you're not." I rose and placed the papers into a fresh binder, sliding it shut with a sound that felt like the seal of war. I turned to him, my voice calm, decisive. "This is no longer defense, Noah. This is exposure. They wanted control dressed as care. They wanted loyalty bought with lies. But when the truth stands in the courtroom, the masks will fall." He nodded once, firm. "I'll testify if you need me." I placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture both maternal and resolute. "Your words already testify. What you've done tonight, it may change everything." When he left, the house fell silent again, but not hollow. The papers lay on my desk. The watch gleamed faintly under the lamplight, and for the first time since the dinner, I felt not only wounded, but armed. I sat with my journal, the pen scratching across the page. They have prepared my funeral while my heart still beats. They write titles on paper as if ink can erase memory. But truth cannot be buried, not by my son's ambition, nor by his wife's charm. Even memory has its traitors, but the truth, it remains. I closed the book and leaned back, the scent of roses drifting through the window, heavy with rain. The storm was coming, but I would not walk into it bowed. I would walk into it with the truth burning in my hands. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and cold air when I stepped inside. Marble columns stretched above me, their weight pressing down, as though reminding me that history judged more harshly than any man. I held Thomas's pocket watch in my palm, the ticking against my skin steadying me like a heartbeat that was not only mine. The gallery was already full. Board members, employees, and investors. Whispers floated like smoke, curling around me as I took my seat beside Marion. Across the aisle, Ethan and Vanessa sat pristine, dressed like models of filial duty. Ethan's navy suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted. Vanessa wore cream, her makeup subtle, her eyes glassy, as if tears waited on command. They looked the part of children concerned for an aging parent. That, I realized, was their first lie of the morning. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the proceedings began. Ethan rose first. His voice carried calm confidence. "Your Honor, my mother has been struggling with memory lapses. She makes decisions based on sentiment, not sound judgment. We love her dearly, but the company, our family's legacy, deserves stability. This petition for conservatorship is about protection, not power." Each word was rehearsed, polished to cut without seeming cruel. He looked toward me briefly, his expression carefully crafted into sorrow. For a moment, I wondered if the gallery believed him. Then Vanessa took the stand. Her hands trembled as she dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "We only want to keep her safe. We want her to enjoy her life, not be burdened with stress. This is the hardest choice we've ever made, but it is made out of love." Her voice cracked on the last word, and a murmur swept through the room. I sat still, my face calm, though inside my stomach twisted. Their performance was flawless. To the untrained eye, they looked like devoted children forced into an impossible position. But Marion had prepared me for this moment. When it was her turn, she did not raise her voice. She placed a thick binder on the table, the sound echoing like a stone dropped into still water. "Your Honor," she began, "we reject the narrative of decline. We will show evidence of Mrs. Harding's continued capability, medical, financial, and ethical. And we will also present documentation proving that this petition was not born of love, but of greed." She handed the first folder to the clerk. Inside were medical reports, clean and unambiguous. "Evaluations from 2 independent specialists within the last 18 months, Marion said. "Both confirm Mrs. Harding is cognitively sound. No evidence of dementia, confusion, or decline." The judge flipped through the pages, his brow lifting slightly. Ethan's jaw tightened, though his expression never broke. Next, Marion presented company records, charts, graphs, signed contracts. Here are 5 years of growth under Mrs. Harding's leadership. Profits rising, client retention above industry average, successful expansions negotiated directly by her. These are not the results of sentiment, they are the results of discipline. I watched the gallery lean forward, eyes scanning the pages. Silence spread wider, heavier. Finally, Marion produced the last set of documents. Her voice sharpened. And here, Your Honor, is where the truth stands revealed. Bank statements showing funds withdrawn from Harding Realty's corporate accounts. The destination, the law firm representing Ethan Harding in this petition. The charges were disguised as consulting fees. In short, Ethan used his mother's own company to finance his attempt to strip her of control. A gasp rippled through the room. The sound of it seemed to rattle even the judge's composure. Ethan's face flushed red, and Vanessa's hand froze on her lap, her composure cracking for the first time. Marion was relentless. She lifted another document. And here are emails from Vanessa Harding to department heads, promising bonuses in exchange for loyalty during the transition. This, Your Honor, is not protection. It is manipulation. The judge adjusted his glasses, studying the papers as though each page weighed heavier than the last. The gallery had gone utterly still. The performance of concern Ethan and Vanessa had delivered so carefully now crumbled under the hard ink of evidence. I did not speak. I didn't need to. The truth was speaking for me. Inside, my emotions churned. Sorrow, anger, but also a fierce clarity. They had not stumbled into betrayal. They had orchestrated it. They had set the stage, written the script, cast themselves as saviors. And yet here in this courtroom, the mask was slipping. I tightened my grip on the watch in my hand, whispering silently to Thomas, "We are not done. Not yet." The judge finally looked up, his gaze sharp. "Mr. Harding, Mrs. Harding," he said, his voice measured, "the evidence presented is grave. The court will take a recess to consider its weight. But I caution you, what has been brought forth today is not the picture of filial devotion you wish to present. It is something else entirely." The gavel struck, and the room exhaled all at once. Ethan's eyes flicked toward me, fury thinly veiled, while Vanessa lowered her head, her shoulders rigid. As I rose, Marion leaned close, her voice a whisper only I could hear. "We've done it, Quinn. They wanted sentiment. We gave them truth, and truth always outlives lies." I nodded, my heart steady now. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift. The courtroom had seen them for what they truly were. The silence that filled the chamber was not disbelief. It was recognition. The courtroom was hushed when we reconvened after recess. The air was thick with anticipation, every cough and shuffle magnified against the silence. I could hear the faint ticking of Thomas's pocket watch in my palm, each beat a reminder that truth was about to be weighed against lies. The judge returned to the bench, his expression solemn, his robe trailing behind him like a shadow of authority. He settled his papers, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the courtroom with the kind of gaze that made every person sit straighter. He began, his voice calm but cutting. After reviewing the petition, the supporting claims, and the evidence presented by both parties, this court finds that the request for conservatorship is without merit. The words landed like thunder. A gasp rippled through the gallery, though Ethan sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes refusing to meet mine. Vanessa's hand shot to her mouth, tears spilling as if on cue. But this time, the room did not move to comfort her. The act had lost its audience. The judge continued. "Medical documentation confirms Mrs. Harding's sound cognitive health. Business records demonstrate strong and responsible leadership. The claims of incompetence are not only unsubstantiated, but contradicted by overwhelming evidence." He paused, his gaze narrowing on Ethan. "Furthermore, this court has received credible documentation that company funds were misappropriated to finance this petition. That matter will be referred to the state prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges." Vanessa let out a quiet sob, the sound breaking against the marble walls, but no one reached for her. Ethan's face paled, his composure finally cracking as the weight of the words settled. For the first time, his mask slipped, revealing not confidence but desperation. "And finally," the judge said, his tone colder now, "the evidence of attempts to manipulate company employees through promises of financial incentive will be forwarded to the Harding Realty Board of Directors. It is their responsibility to determine the petitioner's standing within the company moving forward." The gavel struck. "This petition is dismissed." Silence held for a moment longer, like the courtroom itself needed time to breathe. Then, the quiet shifted into whispers, each one sharper than applause. People looked at me not with pity, but with respect. The tide had turned fully, and Ethan and Vanessa knew it. I turned my eyes toward them. Ethan's lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. His suit, his carefully rehearsed lines, his polished facade, all of it seemed small now, flimsy against the weight of truth. Vanessa's tears streaked her makeup, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for someone to believe her. No one did. In that moment, I saw it clearly. The perfect image they had constructed was shattering before everyone's eyes. The cracks spread quickly, unstoppable, until the mask fell completely. And for the first time, I felt no fear, no confusion, only clarity. I rose slowly, the pocket watch warm in my hand. As I stood, I could almost hear Thomas's voice. "For every time you doubt, remember your strength." My eyes stayed on Ethan. He whispered hoarsely, "This isn't over, Mother." I answered softly, but the steel in my tone carried through the room. "It's over for today, and today is enough." Vanessa tried to interject, her voice trembling. "We only wanted what was best." But the words fell flat. No one in the room believed them anymore. As I walked out of the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter, sharper, like the aftermath of a storm. The board members and investors in the gallery avoided Ethan's gaze, their eyes turning instead toward me. Not all offered smiles, but the respect was clear, and respect was more powerful than any applause. Outside, the Charleston air smelled of salt and rain. I paused on the courthouse steps, lifting my face to the sky. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe deeply. The fight wasn't over. There were still reviews, decisions, consequences to come, but the foundation of Ethan and Vanessa's scheme had collapsed. Inside me, the ache of betrayal remained, but alongside it was something else. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that truth had prevailed. My son had tried to erase me. Instead, the world had seen him for who he truly was. That night at my desk, I opened my journal. By lamplight, I wrote, "Today, the mask broke. Love twisted into control, care disguised as theft. It all came undone under the light of truth. The court dismissed their lies. The board will see their fraud, and the law will weigh their crimes. I saw my son not as a boy I raised, but as a man undone by his own hunger. And yet, even in this pain, I stand. For dignity, for memory, for Thomas." I closed the journal and placed the pocket watch on top, its ticking steady, like the heartbeat of survival. The war was not finished, but I had won the first battle. And sometimes, one battle is enough to change everything. The trial ended, but the echoes of its judgment spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Within hours, Harding Realty's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The news had traveled fast. Their chosen heir, the man they thought was the future of the company, had been exposed as reckless and self-serving. That night, I walked into the boardroom, a place that had once felt like a second home. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lights. Around it sat men and women who had known me for decades, their faces lined with caution, some with shame. Ethan's chair was conspicuously empty, a symbol of how quickly power can vanish when built on deceit. The chairman cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Ethan Harding is suspended from all company duties pending a full internal investigation. His access to accounts and documents has been revoked. The words carried no malice, just necessity. Yet I felt them strike deep, as if they were chiseling away at the boy I once held in my arms. Still, I remained steady. Some wounds could no longer bleed. They had hardened into scars. I took my seat at the head of the table, the pocket watch in my palm grounding me. My voice was calm, but every syllable carried steel. This legacy was not built to be exploited. It was built with discipline, sacrifice, and vision. Family or not, anyone who tries to twist it for selfish gain will be held accountable. A silence settled after my words, heavier than any gavel. I could see it in their eyes. They knew the old Quinn Harding was gone. What sat before them now was a woman unwilling to bend, even to blood. Across town, Vanessa faced her own reckoning. The same social circle that had once fawned over her curated perfection now whispered behind champagne glasses. Invitations to galas grew cold, her name absent from charity rosters. Where once she had been admired for her elegance, she was now pitied, even scorned. In Charleston society, betrayal carried a scent, and she could not wash it away. I heard from an old acquaintance that she broke down at a luncheon. Her tears met not with sympathy, but with silence. Those who had clapped for her ambition now turned their backs. Reputation, I thought, is a house built of glass. One crack, and it shatters in public view. Ethan fared no better. His investors withdrew one by one, their calls to Marion seeking assurance that their money would be safeguarded by anyone but him. The arrogance he once wore like armor was gone, replaced by a hollow defiance. When I saw him briefly in the company parking lot days later, he could not meet my gaze. He muttered, "You think you've won, Mother, but you've destroyed your own son." I answered quietly, "No, Ethan, you destroyed yourself. I only refuse to be your accomplice." He said nothing more. His footsteps faded into the distance, carrying the weight of a future he had thrown away. At night in my study, I opened my journal. The ink bled heavy onto the page as I wrote. Justice does not end with a verdict. It lingers, reshaping lives in silence. Ethan stands stripped of power, Vanessa of reputation. The board has chosen vigilance over vanity, and I, though wounded, still hold the line. This house of ours, built with Thomas's sweat and my resolve, will not be turned into a grave for dignity. It remains alive because I remain alive. I paused, listening to the steady tick of the pocket watch. The sound reminded me of Thomas's voice. "Protect what matters, Quinn, even if you stand alone." Tonight, I realized I was no longer standing alone. The lies had fallen, and those who once doubted now looked to me again. The investigation into Ethan's misconduct began immediately. Files were opened, bank records examined, every false signature laid bare. Each revelation painted him not as a visionary, but as a gambler with other people's trust. The board did not gloat. They documented. There was no room for sentiment now, and as for me, I sat through every meeting with a calm that came not from triumph, but from survival. I had stared betrayal in the eye and endured. That endurance had become my greatest strength. In the quiet after each meeting, I returned home to my roses. Their petals glistened with dew, bending under the weight, yet never breaking. I touched the blooms gently, whispering to myself, "Like them, I bow only to rise again." Vanessa's downfall spread further than the boardrooms and drawing rooms. Mothers who once praised her example now whispered to their daughters, "Don't let ambition blind you." Fathers who once admired Ethan's drive shook their heads and said, "Remember your mother when you count your wealth." They had become cautionary tales, unwilling teachers in the classroom of consequence. And me, I remained the witness. I remained the survivor. When the board gathered again weeks later, I was invited to speak. The room was tense, the smell of fresh paper and ink mixing with quiet apprehension. I stood, pocket watch in hand, and looked each of them in the eye. "Do not mistake my silence for weakness," I said. "I will not allow this company, this legacy, to be reshaped by lies." My son's betrayal does not define me. What defines me is the choice to fight for truth when betrayal tried to silence me. That is what will carry this company forward. That is what will carry me forward. The room was silent still, but this time it was not fear that filled it. It was respect. The night was cool, the air washed clean by a summer rain. I sat alone in my rose garden, the soil still damp beneath my shoes, the fragrance of wet earth drifting upward like incense. The moonlight painted silver across the petals, each bloom carrying droplets that sparkled as if the stars had fallen into my backyard. I opened my leather journal, its pages swollen from years of ink and confession. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, but not from weakness, only from the weight of what had been carried and finally laid down. They thought a signature could erase my life, I wrote, but memories cannot be signed away. The heart cannot be notarized. I chose to tell my story, and it will not end in silence. The pen scratched steady across the page, each word carving itself into permanence. When I set it down, the garden was quiet, save for the slow drip of water from the trellis and the steady rhythm of the pocket watch in my palm. I traced its engraved words with my thumb. For every time you doubt, remember your strength. Thomas's gift had survived every storm, and tonight, so had I. The ticking was proof that time moves forward, indifferent to betrayal or triumph, but dignity can hold fast if you choose to protect it. I thought of Ethan and Vanessa, their polished smiles, their whispered schemes, their unraveling before a judge. Once, I would have cried for them, begged for closeness. Now, I saw their downfall as the natural harvest of seeds they had planted themselves. Betrayal blooms too, but its flowers are poison. In my mind, I heard Ethan's voice as a boy, laughing as he ran through this same garden, his shoes muddy, his hands clutching roses too tightly, thorns pricking his skin. "It doesn't hurt, Mama," he once said. But it did, and maybe that was always his way, to pretend pain wasn't real until it consumed him. Vanessa's words echoed too, her careful tone, her saccharine smile. "If you just let go, the family will be complete." But I had learned the truth. Completeness is not built on erasing the inconvenient, even when that inconvenience is a mother's will. The boardroom still lingered in my memory, their wary eyes shifting toward me, then away from Ethan. I had not raised my voice, I had not sought revenge. I had spoken only truth, and truth had done the cutting. In that silence, I had become more than a widow fighting for her dignity. I had become a mirror, showing them who they were when greed called their names. I breathed in the scent of roses, sharp and sweet, and whispered into the night, "Thomas, we protected it. Not just the company, not just the house. We protected the promise." Because that was what it had always been about. Not the money, not the title, not the legacy written in contracts. It was about the invisible vow we made to each other, that what we built would never be twisted into a weapon against those who loved it. The garden stirred with a light breeze, leaves rustling like soft applause. I held the pocket watch tighter, letting its rhythm steady me. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest eased. I knew the world would keep watching. Ethan's suspension would turn to dismissal, his name whispered in disappointment. Vanessa's social climb had collapsed, and the same lips that praised her now cut her down. Those were their consequences to carry. Mine was different. Mine was to live on, with dignity intact, with truth as my shield. I looked down at the journal, its last words glowing in lamplight. "I am still standing." Closing it gently, I whispered the only benediction I had left. This story does not end with betrayal. It ends with survival. And survival is enough. I rose slowly, the damp earth cool beneath my feet, the roses swaying as if bowing in recognition. My hand lingered on the watch one last time before I tucked it into my pocket. The ticking followed me inside, steady, unyielding, alive. And as the house closed around me, I understood. They had tried to write me out of my own life, but I had taken the pen back. My story would never be erased, Not by signatures, not by betrayal, not by silence.